Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. And may we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace and beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jeff said something before some of the rest of you joined. We may all wish him a happy 69th birthday. So happy birthday, Jeff Saulich. I'm so glad to have you among us. And may this be, as you said, may this be a most auspicious year for you.
I believe Cindy did some kind of electronical celebratory thingy. I don't know what the process is. There it is again.
Yeah, she's very, very skilled at that sort of thing. So there's Fred Hughes. How good. Namaste, Fred.
Hello to everybody.
So, welcome to our Saturday afternoon reading and discussion of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as interpreted and commented on by Swami Prabhavananda. Prabhavananda was the head of the Vedanta Society of Southern California from the time he founded it in 1929 until he left the body quite deliberately on July 4th, 1976, the bicentennial of this nation. The Swami produced this book so that Westerners could understand the aphoristic teachings of Patanjali. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are just that, short sutras, short aphorisms. And without the skilled interpretation of someone like Swami Prabhavananda, are very difficult for us to use as a workbook. But which is what he intended it to be. Swami Vivekananda is very clear about that in his interpretation and commentary. So Swami Prabhavananda gives us a good deal of commentary as we go along. To that, there's amplification and clarification sometimes from here. And of course, all of the wonderful contributions in the form of comments, concerns, and questions from you all. So with that preamble, is there anything left from previous sessions that anyone would like to take up in the way of a comment from their own wisdom or experience, or on what we've studied so far, or any concern or question that you have about what it is that Patanjali is giving us as interpreted and commented on by the Swami? All right, dear. So I'll just leave it to you, Jeff, to decide where we should start reading, and let us be on our way.
All right, well, we will pick up from where we left off last time. We're in the middle of chapter 2, which is yoga and its practice, and we're resuming with shloka number 34. The obstacles to yoga, such as acts of violence and untruth, may be directly created or indirectly caused or approved. They must be motivated by greed, anger, or self-interest. They may be small or moderate or great, but they never cease to result in pain and ignorance. One should overcome distracting thoughts by remembering this. And I'll repeat shloka 34 again. The obstacles to yoga, such as acts of violence and untruth, may be directly created or indirectly caused or approved. They may be motivated by greed, anger, or self-interest. They may be small or moderate or great, but they never cease to result in pain and ignorance. One should overcome distracting thoughts by remembering this.
So he's commenting on the first two aspects of the yamas, that we should be harmless, we should cause no harm to others, which is here said in terms of violence, tiny to great, or untruth. Truthfulness to starting with ourselves, to thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, that thou canst not be false to anyone. So the first thing we need to be is truthful to ourselves about who we are, how we are, and where we are in our lives. With that, I'll get out of the way and let the Swami comment.
Everything we do, say, or think, or even indirectly cause or passively sanction, will inevitably produce consequences, good, bad, or composite, and these consequences will react in some measure upon ourselves. Our most secret ill wishes toward others, our remotest permission of evil done to others, can only end by hurting us, by increasing our own ignorance and pain. This is an absolute law of nature. If we could remember it always, we should learn to control our tongues and our thoughts.
Now, the Swami would not say something so definitive as this is an absolute law of nature without knowing what he's talking about and meaning every syllable. This is an absolute law of nature. There is no escape from it, no matter how wily our minds are. There is no escape from this absolute law of nature. Any comments or concerns or questions from anyone about this necessity for not practicing violence, either in our secret thoughts or overt actions, or the necessity for being truthful to ourselves and thereby being truthful to others.
Michaela is asking about the page numbers, and I have an unusual book that's different page numbering from everybody else, but it's chapter 2, and we're about to read shloka number 35.
So it's well along in chapter 2, Michele. And whatever book you have should have the sutra or shloka numbers. So
I have the book that you have on your webpage or the email that you send. So Jeffrey, could you just say the number on there? Which number?
My book is a different edition of the same book. We're all reading the same book, but my page numbers are totally different from everybody else.
Okay, thank you.
It's
shloka 35. We're about to start number 35.
in chapter 2. When a man becomes steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his presence. Repeating Shloka 35, when a man becomes steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his presence. We are accustomed to use the word harmless in a rather derogatory sense. It has become almost synonymous with ineffectual. Yet the perfected harmlessness of the saint is by no means ineffectual. It is a positive psychological force of tremendous power. When a man has truly and entirely renounced violence in his own thoughts and in his dealings with others, he begins to create an atmosphere around himself within which violence and enmity must cease to exist because they find no reciprocation. Animals, too, are sensitive to such an atmosphere. Wild beasts may be temporarily cowed with whips, but they can only be rendered harmless by the power of genuine harmlessness, as every good trainer knows. A lady who was accustomed to handle deadly snakes used to explain, "You see, they know I won't hurt them." The test of ahimsa, or harmlessness, is absence of jealousy, says Swami Vivekananda. The so-called great men of the world may start that again. The so-called great men of the world may all be seen to become jealous of each other for a small name, for a little fame, and for a few bits of gold. As long as this jealousy exists in a heart, it is far away from the perfection of ahimsa. And that concludes the commentary for number 35.
Okay. Anything at all from anyone about what's been read or what's been said about 34 and 35? This necessity for being harmless in the world and what it generates. Now, the Swami he mentions saints, but of course, perhaps the most famous that we know is St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi was known to be beloved, not only by all men, even those who competed with him loved him, but animals just flocked to him. Birds lit on him. Squirrels and rabbits and other small creatures just approached him. And in later years, we can hear and see the life in a documentary about Padre Pio. Padre Pio is a modern Catholic saint for whom the same thing occurred. He would sit in a field under a tree, not in order to attract anything, but simply for his own contemplation and lectio divina. And animals would flock to him, birds, animals. So what you generate around you is remarkable if you are in this state of being. There is a story told by Swami Prabhupada of his teacher, Swami Brahmananda or Raja Maharaj. The Swami, as a young man, was walking with another young man and Swami Brahmananda, Raja Maharaj. They're in a narrow lane. Suddenly they hear calling out, get out of the way, mad bull coming toward you. So the two boys come around in front of Brahmananda in order to protect him. He simply brushes them behind him with his arms. And when the mad bull comes out from behind a building and is charging toward them, the Swami doesn't do anything at all. He simply gazes at the bull. And it really is a mad bull frothing at the nostrils and all that whole business. Tossing its horns to the one side or another. The bull comes to a halt. His head goes down. It isn't as if he's bowing to the, but it had been up, in this aggressive posture. The head just slowly comes down. And it calms down. And it goes on its way, no longer in that state of being. This is a story told by Swami Prabhupada that illustrates the power that is generated by someone who truly practices ahimsa. Any comments or questions or concerns from anyone?
Yes, brother. Does this quality have something to do with the subtle body that envelops us? It's my understanding that.
Well, yes, of course, everything is manifested through that subtle body. The subtle body is what communicates with other subtle bodies, like the bull's subtle body in the story just told. So yes, it is the subtle rather than the gross. Sometimes yogis know mantras that take it from the subtle to the gross. But though they may say the mantra aloud, it isn't necessary. If we remember back to the very first Star Wars film, Obi-Wan Kenobi is walking with a stormtrooper, and the stormtrooper is going to give them some real trouble. I forget the details, it's been so long. But I remember something very significant. Obi-Wan Kenobi, there's an isolated shot, a shot of just Obi-Wan Kenobi's hand, which is down beside himself and between him and the stormtrooper. And the hand simply makes this little gesture. It's a kind of circular gesture. And in a moment, the stormtrooper's behavior changes. And instead of being aggressive toward them, becomes conciliatory and helpful. So this is an example in that Star Wars film of the mythology of the Jedi Knights. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a Jedi, and their power. So yes, it's in the subtle realm, though as I say, there are stories of yogis killing something and then bringing it back to life with mantras that they say aloud. But as it's understood, they needn't say them aloud. Does that answer the question, Jeff?
I think so. But why do they say the mantras aloud if they don't have to?
To show off. It's as simple as that.
Well, to teach others then.
No, they may teach the mantras to others, but they say them so fast that if you listen to a pujari like Aditya Chaturvedi, they're saying the mantras so fast that they cannot be understood or learned. So they're not saying them aloud in order to teach them. They're just saying them aloud to show off. That's my understanding.
Or they're at least teaching others that it's the mantra that's doing the work.
Yeah, okay. Well said. But that's what showing off is a kind of teaching others by setting yourself apart rather than being inclusive. You're being exclusive.
I was kind of thinking about the mantras, that when you have the senses of perception, instead of just depending on eyes or memory, you're also depending on ears to bring the impulses into your chitta and then create the vritti. So it's probably an additional layer of reinforcement to the vritti when you chant the mantras aloud.
All right, Bhaskar, well said. Yes, but you will see pujaris and others who are chanting mantras. They will sometimes be muttering them under their breath, so to speak. So they're creating that vibration in the atmosphere, the air, but not very tangibly. So yeah, I think you're right. There is that aspect of it. That's a generous way to think about it.
So on this sutra, ahimsa, or harmlessness or non-violence, reminds me of both Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And in fact, Gandhi actually takes 2 out of these 10 principles of Patanjali, ahimsa, and the next one that we'll be studying, satya. And Gandhi actually builds his entire philosophy of principle around these 2 principles of Patanjali.
Yes, and Martin Luther King learned them, particularly in the person of a man named James Lawson, Reverend James Lawson, who went to India and studied these things from Gandhi and Gandhi's organization and came back and taught them not only to King, but he was the one who was teaching the young people in the basements of churches, teaching them. Reverend James Lawson was the one teaching them the practice of just exactly what you're talking about. And one of you just mentioned satya. He said one of the most important things that must be learned is satyagraha, insistence on the truth. What truth? That the divine being exists in you, the divine being or the divine presence exists in your opponent. It may be covered up by their ignorance, but nevertheless, that is what is there. And that is what you are honoring by your nonviolence. You're honoring that divine person. And as was just pointed out by the Swami in earlier commentary, it generates a tremendous power. And so both Gandhi and King prevailed. They and their followers prevailed against the Raj, against segregation, apartheid here in the United States. They prevailed because of the power of ahimsa and satyagraha, the principle. And this is, of course, what underlies the ahimsa. You only harm yourself when you try to harm the divine being. You cover yourself with greater ignorance, and so you suffer pain, as the Swami pointed out. So this is, you're absolutely right, Bhaskar. It is the power comes from this insistence on satya, on the truth. And the truth, of course, was just discussed.
I have a comment about that too, just sort of the other side of maybe partly why there's that power in insisting on the truth. Those who are, go about allowing themselves to be very self-centered and greedy and blaming other people and all that, those sorts of feelings are exhausting. And how can you have any power to prevail if, all of those, it's not that we shouldn't have negative emotions because we all have them, but it's being aware of them and responding to our own emotions and going, okay, that's not taking me where I want to go. And it's also exhausting. So yeah, I just want to throw that in.
Oh, and exhausting is exactly right, dear. It's one of the ways we cause ourselves pain, is to exhaust ourselves. As Bhaskar was pointing out earlier, one of the things that happens when we verbalize these things, when our mind is churning with all of this that you just described, envy, rage, all of those negative things. What are we doing? We're generating these vrittis, these whirlpools, churning our mind. And what do these whirlpools do? Whirlpools pull you down. And though you don't know that you're being pulled down, your true original nature is this pure perfection and peacefulness. So you're being pulled down from that. And yes, you're so right. It is exhausting. Well, well said.
Brother Shankara, Somesh here.
Hello, Somesh.
Hi. Shankara, today we are talking about non-violence. And on Wednesday, we talked about Gita, where Shri Krishna asked Arjun to go and fight the war. And that's totally violent and, like extreme violence. How do you, like, and like both have their place. That's how I see it. So is it that like non-violence is not the only way, or there is, and it's not only the Mahabharata. There are many instances where there have been wars, and they have been the righteous wars. So
what does Sri Krishna say to Arjuna? You as a warrior, it is your caste duty as a kshatriya. It is so it is within that categorization, within that way of thinking, that he encourages him to do this. Now, of course, all of the Gita is a metaphor. And the more you study it, the more you see how metaphorical it is, that this battle that is being fought within us.
mm-hmm.
But there was a Kurukshetra war. The archaeologists have proven it. They have done the research to show that there actually was a huge battle fought on the Kurukshetra plain. So just whether all these things that are said by Sanjaya and so on happened exactly as told, Arjuna asking that his chariot be driven out between the two armies, throwing down his weapons and saying, I will not fight, and Krishna responding and so on. Whether it happened exactly that way, the scholars are, of more than one opinion about it. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The teachings are there. And so what are the teachings? The teachings are for a person who is a warrior by caste. And in modern times, we can look very carefully, if we wish, at the person of George Patton, General George Patton, who was, by his own assertion, a warrior by caste, a warrior by birth, at birth after birth after birth. And he remembered those prior births. This is what he says, and he documents it. I mean, it's there in the biographies and his own autobiographical statements. So such beings exist. They are warriors. That is their being. He said, "God help me, I love it so." He said those words. His adjutant heard him say that. Standing on a battlefield in the midst of all this carnage, George Patton said, "God help me, I love it so." So there is, as you said, Somesh, a place for this. We cannot allow such as Hitler to conquer the world at their will. They must be resisted. And it takes such as George Patton and Charles Montgomery and General Zhukov for the Russians and so on. These warriors by caste, by birth, to bring down these extreme examples of violence and horror. So yes, there's no such thing as one. There's duality wherever we look.
Mm-hmm.
But we're studying now Patanjali's instructions to people who wish to follow the path of interior or psychic control yoga. These are not instructions for everyone. These are not instructions to Arjuna. They might be, but only after the battle. So these are not, as is said often, each of these yogas is not for everyone. And Raja Yoga, if followed the way Patanjali intended, is a very demanding path indeed, and one in which you will divorce yourself from the world and not participate in any, as was said in commentary on an earlier shloka, you won't participate in any war. Patanjali wouldn't hear of it because it's not your duty. Thank you so much.
So, brother, am I kind of halfway there because I don't care about the Super Bowl?
Well, Jeff, you're another one of our wonderful sit-down comedians. Yes, indeed. You're halfway there or more if you don't care about the Super Bowl. Did you used to care about the Super Bowl?
Never did.
Ah,
Never.
well.
I kind of like baseball. I kind of appreciate baseball, but I only watch the World Series. Otherwise, the rest of the season, I just don't care.
Yeah, well, it's if you watch Ken Burns's nine episode meditation on baseball, you really gain a great appreciation for baseball. It is a great, great game, no two ways about it. And though there is some violence, it's not predicated on violence. It's predicated on skill and wiliness by the two managers. It's a great game.
it's a combination of skill and chance and logic, and it is an interesting game.
Yes, it is. As is cricket.
That I wouldn't know.
Well, I got a chance to sit with people when I was in India in 1999 who know cricket. And I mean, it's part of their bloodline now. And so I got an appreciation for it. Not an understanding, but an appreciation. Enough about that. Anything else from anyone before we go on to the next shloka, which we're told is on Satya, truth.
So I just want to follow up on Somesh's question. So he's bringing up the observation that if I'm going with Gita, Karma Yoga says I need to fight the righteous war. If I'm going with Patanjali, which is what we are doing today, we should follow Ahimsa or sloka number 35. How do I resolve it? Or do I have to resolve it?
If we're going to practice it. But what does Krishna say in the Gita? He says, do your own duty, not the duty of others. However perfectly you may do the duty of others, that will lead you into spiritual danger. Do your own duty. And he predicates this on, which was something that was very much a part of the world of Sri Krishna and the Gita as he spoke it. Caste. Each caste had their own duty, their own system of duties. And so even Sri Krishna isn't saying to everyone they should fall out and volunteer to be in one of those armies. No, sir, that's not what he's saying. He's saying to Arjuna, it is for you and the other warriors to do their duty. But in chapter 2 on karma, or chapter 3 on karma yoga, Krishna is very explicit about the necessity to do your own duty, however imperfectly. He says these very words, however imperfectly, rather than do someone else's duty, though you may do it more perfectly. So the distinction is made in the Gita between those who would follow an interior path and those who, like Arjuna, have the duty to do this righteous warrior role. So there's no conflict between the Gita and Patanjali if you look carefully at what Sri Krishna says in chapter 3.
Because it's pointing towards dharma, which is supposed to be your Vishesh dharma, pointing you to your true north.
Not only to dharma, which is that's the umbrella term, but to your swadharma, your particular dharma within the system of dharma. What are your duties? What is it that is incumbent on you? So yes, everything must be done dharmically. And that was one of the things that was falling apart right there in Krishna's time at the end of the Bronze Age. Dharma was falling apart, and the Kurukshetra war, though started by people who, like in the code of knighthood, had sworn to behave according to the code of chivalry, knighthood, dharma. It didn't happen in practice. And it's lamented in the Mahabharata afterwards, and it ends up with the destruction of Sri Krishna's clan, the Vrishnis. They fall to fighting among themselves. And so Krishna and his clan disappear from the world in this most unhappy circumstance. And his people, his clan, the Vrishnis.
So, Brother Shankara,
Yes, sir.
can we say that General Patton was close to realization, or at least accumulating favorable karma, because he was being true to his dharma?
If you read his prayers, and most particularly the prayers that are contained in his letters to his wife, you can say that Patton was a very evolved spiritual aspirant. And that's why he said what he said. God help me. He meant it. This was not just a casual expression. God help me. I love it so. You know, he felt bound by his warrior caste. God help me. So yes, I think if you read the biographies of Patton, there are 3 really good ones, and then some of the autobiographical stuff, particularly his letters to his wife. You find that there's a very deep person. He could not have exerted the power that he exerted. We just heard about it. He could not have done that if he hadn't. That incident that's in the film, where the film Patton, that incident where he says to his chaplain, "You go to your God and you pray a weather prayer. I want some better weather so we can get some air cover. We're getting devastated here because we can't get any air cover." And the chaplain does what he's asked, and the next day there is fair weather, and the air cover, the fighters can come in and do their part of the job. And Patton commends him and gives him a medal. Now we've strayed a bit from the Gita in the sense here, but this is how we see these things occurring in the world around us. And so, yes, Patton was a remarkable soul.
And Brother Shankara, another thing I see is that it's always, even Shri Krishna, he first follows the path of ahimsa, which is he goes to Duryodhan and, try to avoid the war, and by telling him, and Duryodhan says, no, whatever he says, that I already know I'm doing wrong, but I'm still can't do it. And another example, I don't know if you are aware, like in the Sikh, we have this community, Sikh community.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, the Mughals, the Islamic emperors were converting everybody, and if somebody didn't convert, they would either cut their skin or like really torture them really bad way.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then, so there was this 9th guru who said that now it's time for somebody to sacrifice so that it could be stopped. And then his son said that, who can be better than you, Dad? I mean, he told his dad went and they killed him and cut his head off. And then the son, he was also a spiritual like guru like them, but then he created an army. He said that, it's time to war because whatever method we are using, ahimsa, is not working. And I see it's like everything is in the service of what is good for humanity. I mean, the path chosen may be different, but it is in service of what's good for human beings to have that freedom or to have that
That is
Like,
that is the duty of the saints and the avatars. You're absolutely right.
yeah.
To to produce, to live out what is good for humanity. And it may seem mysterious on the future. We're told that the lives of saints are impenetrable to our left minds because they're not coming from that way of thinking and being.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shankar.
Anything else before we read on? This is very productive. This is, even this discursion into the discussion about General Patton, I think, was useful in that we see it as a real life example of an Arjun. He was a warrior.
I have a comment.
Please.
Duty, or the concept of duty, seems to me to be a social construct that is developed by the powers that be in different eras and cultures and civilizations. And the vast majority of the time, people's sense of duty is being foisted upon them by the culture they're in. And
Amen. Absolutely.
I mean, to me, there's a real conflict between doing your duty and being self-determined.
You're absolutely right. And once again, in chapter 3, Sri Krishna addresses this full on, face to face. He says the person who is truly self-determined is free of all duty, and as a matter of fact, all action. The only thing that is incumbent upon them is to be careful not to behave in such a way that it misleads others, that it misleads them into, so they mustn't be so aberrant in their behavior that they confuse others. And he points to himself. Sri Krishna points to himself. He says, look, there's nothing I want or need. There's no reason for me to do this, but for the good of humanity. So I behave in such a way that if people follow me, it will be auspicious. But you're absolutely right, Cindy. There is a deep conflict between the social constructs of such thing as caste or class, and which it emphatically exists in our culture, this class construct. There's an irreconcilable conflict between that and self-determination. And self-determination is the way toward freedom and happiness. So but it's a fine line to walk, as Sri Krishna points out. This whole business of spiritual practice is a fine line to walk. That's why it's called the razor's edge. And it's why Sri Krishna points out, and it's no surprise to any of us, that Maya is often termed Mahamaya because it is so powerful. The gunas, which are again in chapter 3, Sri Krishna says, get over the delusion that you're the doer. You're not the doer. The gunas are the doer. You're the witness. But, until you realize that, you will experience the fruits of your actions as karma. Blah, 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 blah. Anything else from anyone? This is what it means to study the art of spirituality together. Okay, there's time. Let's read on.
All right, shloka number 36. When a man becomes steadfast in his abstention from falsehood, he gets the power of obtaining for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. And I'll repeat that, number 36. When a man becomes steadfast in his abstention from falsehood, he gets the power of obtaining for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves.
I'll give you an example. Swami Swahananda became the youngest head of the New Delhi center of the Ramakrishna Math mission at age 41. He embodied just exactly what this shloka talks about, complete steadfastness in truth. As a result, whatever he said would happen. And this disturbed him because he had to be so very careful about what he said, because it would happen. It would manifest in the real world, whatever he said. And so he prayed to the Divine Mother, Mother, please take away this power, because it's too demanding that I have to be so attentive every moment. Otherwise, I'll say something and it will happen. And of course, he was very well aware that there is no such thing as an action without both good and bad fruits. There's no such thing as, in this world, this realm of duality, of something that is totally unalloyed. And so she did. Now, this is not a story told about Swami Swahananda. It is a story told in my hearing. And if you knew Swami Swahananda, you would have known, you would have seen that it troubled people, because you couldn't say things to Swami Swahananda without the risk of them being repeated, because he just didn't want to be the bearer of confidences. So it was known that, if you want something kept secret, don't tell it to Swami Swahananda. It isn't that he would deliberately, betray you. It's just that he didn't want to be the bearer of confidences. He didn't want to have to keep secrets. So truthfulness was just his absolute nature, which is why when he said something to you, particularly if it was auspicious, it just became a treasure, Well, even the things that were inauspicious, they left a mark, but, it wouldn't necessarily be a bright spot. So would you repeat that shloka again, please, and then read on into the commentary, unless there's anything else from anyone? Okay.
Number 36. When a man becomes steadfast in his abstention from falsehood, he gets the power of obtaining for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. An ordinary man is said to be truthful when his words correspond to the facts of which he speaks. But when a man becomes perfected in truthfulness, he gains control, so to speak, of the truth. He no longer has to obey facts. Facts obey him. He cannot think or even dream a lie. Everything he says becomes true. If he blesses someone, that person is blessed, no matter whether the blessing was deserved or not. He has, in other words, the power of conferring the fruits of good deeds in a manner which is not subject to the law of karma. He can also perform miraculous cures by simply telling the sick man that he is well. Sounds like a perfect description of Swami Swahananda that you were just mentioning, brother.
And of Jesus.
Indeed. So that concludes that commentary.
Anything else from anyone about this perfection of satya, perfection of steadfastness, so that it goes beyond correspondence, just that what you say corresponds to the facts of the matter. It goes deeper, as Bhaskar was pointing out earlier. It goes into the subtle realm, where things manifest, which is where things manifest before they become manifest in the gross realm.
So could this be an example of siddhi? I know siddhis are talked about in chapter 3, and this is chapter 2, but just a question.
Yes, of course it's a siddhi. Of course, but it's not one that is sought. The powers that are described, or siddhis that are described in chapter 3, are things that you do deliberately in order to manifest that particular siddhi. That's why they're called occult powers or psychic powers. They're not spiritual powers, they're psychic powers. This that we've just discussed is a spiritual siddhi, and because it depends on adherence to this spiritual practice of satya, and for that matter, ahimsa and satya. So, but you're right, it is a siddhi, and it is an immensely powerful siddhi, as we just talked. As Jeff brought up Swami Swahananda, describing Swami Swahananda, yes, but then note that the comment was also made that it described Christ, because Christ's, he could simply say to the centurion, your servant is healed, though he was miles and miles and miles away from where the servant was. And he also said, it is not by my words that this is done, it is by your faith. I have not known such faith in all Israel as this faith of the Roman centurion. And the way he describes it, he says, I can tell people what to do, and they have to do it. You can say that, you can do that in the subtle realm. So please do it on behalf of my servant. And Jesus says it's already done because of your faith that it would be so. Such faith I have not known in all Israel. These things are very moving if you let your mind rest on them. The implications are very moving. They'll bring you to tears. This is not trivial, what we're discussing here. This is the heart of the matter, which is why Patanjali starts his instructions. Limbs 1 and 2 are the yamas and the niyamas. We'll get to the niyamas as we move along. If we restrain ourselves from harmlessness, what do we replace that with? If we restrain ourselves from falsehood, what do we replace that with? As Patanjali says, we replace the lower samskaras with the higher samskaras. And the higher samskaras are still within time, space, and causation. That's why they're called samskaras. But they lead us upward, so that the vrittis do not pull us down in the way that they did before. We see them for what they are because of our change in our behavior. This is, it's all about how we behave. So our behavior changes. As Swami Swahananda said, the only true measure of spiritual progress is change in behavior. And it's because we've become persuaded of a higher truth. It isn't that we've reasoned it out. No, 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 no. There may be reasoning involved, but we simply have become persuaded that the observances are a better way to live than the things that we're restraining ourselves from.
Brother Shankara, would we call like Martin Luther King's speech, like, I have a dream, that speech, that did change the behavior, and then the facts obeyed him? May not be at the same time, but at some point,
and they did, and he knew his fate when he said it. I may not live to see, he spoke as Moses spoke. I may not live to see this. Because he knew, I think he had been given that grace to know that he would be assassinated. It seems to be contained in that speech. After Kennedy and Robert Kennedy had been assassinated, what was he to think? Of course, it became clear to him that anybody doing what he was doing was in danger of that. But you're right, Martin Luther King facts obeyed him because, the truth obeyed him. Lyndon Johnson's speech to George Russell, the senator from Georgia at the time, which you can hear, there's a button in the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library that you can push and hear the recording that Lyndon Johnson recorded everything that he said in the Oval Office also. It wasn't just Nixon. And you can hear the recording of his telephone conversation with George Russell, in which he's telling George Russell that he must persuade the Dixiecrats to vote for the Civil Rights Act. And when Russell begins to, Johnson interrupts him and says, George, it is your president asking you to do this. And once again, I say these things, if you let your mind rest on them, they bring you to tears, because Russell then says, very well, Mr. President, we'll do it. And they did, and the act passed, and we know that what else happened and didn't happen. But this is, I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Somesh, because it is, again, a real life example like George Patton and Mahatma Gandhi. These things happened in our, if not in our lifetimes, certainly it happened. These things happened in my lifetime. It's amazing to see. All three of these figures that we've discussed, George Patton, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, these were all people that they're right here, right now.
Yeah.
So anything else from anyone, dears? All right. Well, it's time to call it quits for today. Any final thoughts or concerns or comments from anyone? All right. Om Hari Om. Om Satoma Satgamaya. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amrutangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from this realm of endless noise and relentless falsehood to your realm, to thine abode. Lead us from that realm to thine abode of silence, serenity, clarity, and peace. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. May we be safe, may we be healthy, may we be cheerful, may we have peace of mind, and may we be always and know we are always in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Anything else at all from anyone? All right, dears. May we be peaceful. May we be harmless. May we be truthful. To thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, that thou canst not be false to anyone. This is a little speech paraphrased from Shakespeare. We may have a class, I'm happy to say. It's not a certainty yet, but it looks like we may have a class on the spiritual greatness of Shakespeare sometime in the summer or early fall, led by Gareth Young. I'm not, as I say, I can't promise it yet, but I'm hoping that there will be a correspondence between the truth of the desire and the facts as they manifest themselves. But in any event, that quote from Shakespeare is profoundly true. We must first be truthful with ourselves. Who am I? What am I doing? What do I truly want? As Cindy said, self-determination. Self-determination. Truthfulness to ourselves about what we truly are and want. May you all be well and in bright spirits.